Hey folks, welcome to Seneca Lake Mysteries, the podcast where we explore the unusual, strange, and unexplained on New York's largest Finger Lake. I'm so glad to have you here. Thanks for listening and thanks for all the support. For this episode, I've got 3 really great and very different types of stories that I'm excited to share with you. First up is the story of Bolton Coit Brown, an artist, painter, lithographer, and mountaineer from Dresden, New York, who lived in the late 19th and early 20th century, who had a very offbeat and curious connection with Seneca Lake. Next is the story of a 2011 UFO sighting that took place near Burnt Hill in Hector, near the Finger Lakes National Forest. It is the most incredible sighting I've ever heard from the Seneca Lake area, involving an up-close encounter with an orb, plenty of high strangeness aspects, 5 witnesses, and eventually an astonishing 8 orbs at once. I've got detailed first-hand accounts, including some parts I pulled from an interview I conducted with a witness a couple of years ago, and it's truly a breathtaking and wild ride. And finally, we'll hear the story of a rare Bigfoot sighting in the Seneca Lake area along Catherine Creek, south of Montour Falls, that took place in 1962. As always, I want to thank everyone for listening, commenting, sharing, donating, and supporting the podcast in so many ways. And before we get to the stories, I want to tell you a quick rundown about the last couple of weeks that I've had. So I've been asking you all for a while to be sure and go to senecalakemysteries.com and subscribe on the website so you don't miss any updates or news. And I've also been promising to post some added stuff on the site, not just the podcasts, for all my subscribers. So last week, I finally made my way out to a very special location near Seneca Lake so I could do a little video tour for my subscribers, which I would then post on the website and only the website. However, my first attempt at recording, which was hampered a little bit by some rainy weather, didn't work out because after I recorded for about 30 to 40 minutes, the video file apparently failed to save correctly or something and was lost. A fact that I didn't discover until I had gotten home. It was annoying and it was frustrating, but I decided I'd go back the next day and record again. So on the second day, it was perfect weather, and I recorded first a short test video to make sure everything was working correctly. The test video came out perfect, so again, I recorded a 30 to 40 minute narrated video. When I was done, I briefly checked the file, which looked like it recorded properly, at the proper length, everything, so I was happy and satisfied, and I headed home to review and edit the video. Then on the drive home, one of my dashboard warning lights popped on. So when I got back home, I had to call my mechanic and set up an appointment. And after the technical issues I had recording the interview with Rick for my last podcast, the interview that I recorded on July 17th, then having the technical issues recording the video tour on the previous day, and then the technical issues with my car, I was kind of feeling like the universe was messing with me a little bit. So anyway, I got home, I loaded the video onto my PC, and it turns out that for some unknown reason, it inexplicably recorded the entire video at a very low frame rate. I think like 10 or 11 frames per second, something like that. So the video was so choppy and jerky that it was totally unusable. Then I double-checked the short test video I had recorded just before I recorded that video tour, and it was perfect. Perfect frame rate, perfect audio, everything. So at this point, I'm chalking it up to some kind of cosmic, energetic disturbance that's been annoying me since July 17th. I'm going to wait a few more days until maybe August 12th, and I'll go and record the video tour again, and I trust that it will come out just fine this time. Anyhow, I just want to let you know that I am working on getting you website subscribers some interesting content to enjoy, and it will be coming soon if the universe is willing. So thanks again for listening. I'm so glad you're here, and let's get to it. So, while much of the discussion on the Seneca Lake Mysteries podcast relates to strange and unexplained phenomena, I'm also intrigued by the unusual history and people from around the lake. Specifically, I wonder about the possibility that somehow the landscape has some sort of indescribable energy that creates an environment or an atmosphere that can inspire and impact the thoughts of the people who live in the area. With this in mind, I've spent time looking into the lives of well-known and influential artists, scientists, and others who've either come from the Seneca Lake area or spent a significant amount of time in the area, and pondering whether the land itself has guided or affected the minds and souls of these individuals in some way. One of the larger-than-life figures of the Seneca Lake area is an artist, painter, lithographer, and mountaineer named Bolton Coit Brown. While Bolton Coit Brown's life was deeply fascinating and he left a legacy that is felt in a variety of fields to this day, it's his very strange connection to the lake itself that I find very thought-provoking. So Bolton Brown was born in 1864 in Dresden, New York, on the western shore of Seneca Lake, where he lived throughout his childhood and into his teenage years. From his earliest days, Bolton was a free spirit and a hardcore anti-authoritarian. As a youngster, Bolton came to the conclusion that Satan didn't exist and was an intellectual inconvenience, in his words. And when Bolton began explaining these beliefs on Satan to his siblings, his father, the Reverend Edmund Woodward Brown, was not happy. The Reverend then tried and convicted his young son of heresy, telling Bolton what he would and would not believe for the remainder of his life. Now, Bolton didn't take kindly to anyone, including his own minister father, telling him what to think, and years later he would remark, "Authority might stop my mouth, but not my brains." Young Bolton was not only a deep, free-thinking boy, he also enjoyed spending the hours wandering the woods and exploring the creeks around Dresden with his friends. He also loved it when the weather turned stormy and the wind would cause Seneca Lake to become filled with large waves that would crash to the shore, and Bolton even had his own unique ritual when the lake turned restless. He would strip naked, walk into the water, and hook his toes to the lake bottom. He would then let the 4-foot-tall waves crash over him, keeping his eyes open while holding his breath so he could watch the shimmering sheet of water behind the wave fall over his face. He would then take another breath and wait for the next wave, over and over and over again. At age 16, Bolton began attending Syracuse University, one of the few schools offering art instruction at the time, eventually graduating with a bachelor's degree in painting. He then took a job teaching freehand drawing to architecture students at Cornell University and began pushing Cornell to create its own art curriculum. But Bolton was known as being often arrogant and sensitive to criticism, and he eventually left Cornell. And after working at a few other schools and traveling in Europe for a handful of years, Bolton received an offer in 1891 to join the staff at the newly founded Stanford University in California, which he accepted. His job was to instruct students in painting and drawing. Upon arriving in California, Bolton was drawn to the Sierra Nevada mountains, where he spent years climbing and drawing the surrounding wilderness. The mountains became his favorite subject for his art, using ink, pencils, and oils to capture the scenery. And in the following years, he met and married his wife Lucy, and even named a mountain after his university, which he labeled Mount Stanford. He soon became one of the most accomplished and storied mountaineers in California during his era. Now, eventually, Bolton started battling with the university's founder, Jane Stanford, over his use of nude models in his drawing classes. And he referred to Jane Stanford's complaints as Mrs. Stanford's Victorian ideals. And in 1902, he was fired from the university. However, 20 years later, he would have a mountain in California named after him, Mount Bolton Brown, which stood and stands 13,538 feet high in the Southern Palisades. Now, Bolton, his wife, and 2 children moved back east, and Lucy, his wife, would divorce him a few years later, primarily due to his stubborn and argumentative nature. Their separation, however, was kept secret for years as they continued to live in the same house, but eventually Bolton began living in what is called today off the grid, in a house without electricity or running water, heated by a wood stove, lit by lanterns, and with a hand-pumped well. So for the next 20 years or so, Bolton dedicated his life to lithography. He would cart 100-pound blocks of flat limestone in a wheelbarrow to his home in the woods, where he would first sketch them with grease crayons before washing the surface with acid to create the lithographs. He became known in the art world as one of the foremost lithographers in America. And meanwhile, he also became the co-founder of the Bird Cliff Arts Colony near Woodstock, New York. And how Bird Cliff continues to be the longest operating arts and crafts colony in America today. Eventually, though, Bolton Brown once again had trouble maintaining a working relationship with one of Bird Cliff's founders, who was also responsible for much of the funding of the endeavor, Ralph Radcliffe Whitehead. And Whitehead fired Bolton Brown. Now, Bolton Brown spent the remainder of his life doing a remarkable amount of lithography, living in New York City and in England for some time. Then in 1936, he became sick with cancer and was told by doctors it was fatal. So he hiked in the woods around Woodstock, eventually finding a large boulder in a dry stream bed. He hired a crew to move the stone to his backyard, and he engraved it with his name and the year of his birth and death, leaving the last number blank to be carved after his passing. And that boulder is still there today. Now, although he died with very little money in a humble home with no modern amenities, Bolton Brown left a remarkable legacy. He instructed numerous young artists at Cornell and Stanford University, had a mountain named after him, co-founded an arts community that still exists today, and created more than 400 lithography pieces, along with countless other examples of his art. But did his youth on Seneca Lake help inspire and create his path that would impact so many people? When that young, free-thinking, rebellious son of a minister would stand naked as the storm-whipped waves of Seneca Lake crashed over his face in a strange sort of ritualistic self-baptism, did that spark something deep within him that would lead to his extraordinary life of consequence? Among the dozens of UFO reports I've reviewed while researching the mysteries of Seneca Lake, there is one I've found to be the most gripping, detailed, and jaw-dropping of them all. I first learned of Eileen and her family's story on the National UFO Reporting Center website. 3 different witnesses, Eileen, her sister, and her niece, each submitted their own report, which took place one summer evening in 2011. It began a few miles east of Burdett and not far from Burnt Hill, the highest elevation in the Seneca Lake area, and ended near Ithaca. Eileen was driving alone while her sister, niece, son, and nephew were in a second vehicle a few miles behind, bringing the total number of witnesses to 5. Eventually, I got in touch with Eileen, and she graciously agreed to tell me her story for my upcoming book, also titled Seneca Lake Mysteries. She also generously provided me with her own minute-by-minute written account of the events of that night in 2011. So using the NUFORC report, an interview from another podcast, her self-written description, and her conversation with me, I've pieced together a detailed telling of the event entirely in Eileen's own words, as well as the words of her sister and niece. In recent months, I've reached out to Eileen to have her on the podcast, but for reasons I won't disclose, she's been unable to be a guest, and I'm not sure if or when she'll be available in the future. So please keep in mind that Eileen has been nothing short of gracious and kind in sharing her story, and I'm still hopeful that she will come on and tell the story herself. But in the meantime, I will retell her story, as I said, in her own words. On the evening of July 13th, 2011, Eileen left an annual family reunion in Watkins Glen around 9:30 p.m. She was traveling alone for the hour-long drive east to her home south of Cortland, New York. Eileen made her way from Watkins Glen north on New York State Route 414 before heading east on New York 79 towards the village of Burdett, located about a mile from the southeast shore of Seneca Lake. Eileen drove on for a few more miles, remembering to keep an eye out for the intersection with New York 277 near the top of a hill, where she would need to bear right and stay on New York 79 towards Ithaca. Quote, I got to the top of the hill and I saw in the distance this big golden ball in the sky. It just hung there and it was glowing gold, yellow, and yellow-white. I thought, what could that be? Is there a playing field here? Is that one of those things that's hanging on a line that keeps the planes from hitting it? I'm trying to give it a category because I had no frame of reference for it, but it was so big, I didn't know what it was. I'm a retired reporter, and I'm just a naturally curious person, so I decided I would go check it out. Instead of turning right like I normally would, I went straight toward where the ball was. I wasn't really paying attention, but I didn't feel like there were a lot of houses around. I pulled off to the side of the road and got out of my car, but left the engine running and looked at it. It was just hanging there, about 3 telephone poles high in the air. I'm not very good at measurements, but it was maybe 25 feet away from where my car was parked if you just go straight along the ground and then straight up. I wasn't far away from it at all. It was about 5 feet in diameter, maybe a little more, just motionless. It was glowing very subtly, kind of pulsing, this sort of golden glow, like a disco ball. I was staring at it for I don't know how long, and it stayed there, and I thought, well, what the heck is this? I thought maybe somebody had some sort of strange aerial device. People have drones and things like that. And then it started to slowly move to the right towards Route 79, and as it moved, it pulsed. And the faster that it moved, the faster the pulsing would be. So I thought, it's got to be some kind of propulsion thing. Then I realized, oh my God, it's a UFO. I got in my car and screeched out of there and followed it. It was going quite quickly, and I was barreling down the road, following it and madly calling my son, who was at the reunion. I wanted to tell him what I was seeing, and he didn't answer. I finally reached my sister's phone, and she got him on the phone, and I said, UFO, UFO, UFO. And he's like, oh my God, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm fine. I'm following it. The object flickered as it moved. The faster it moved, the more rapidly it flickered yellow, white, and gold. Suddenly, it went up quickly, and I noticed that there were other orbs higher up. It was joining these 3 or 4 other orbs high up in the sky, and they were kind of hanging out with each other, kind of twirling around each other. Some of them had flares coming out of them, like strange red flares or orange flares. I stopped my car, got out, and was just standing there. Lower down in the horizon, I saw a few more rising up, and there was one that was coming right at me. The orb came right at me, then it rose up to join the other ones, and they were just kind of hanging out and careening across the sky. I counted 8 of them. Then I got back in my car and followed them. As I was following them, I thought, is this going to take me on board? But I didn't know if it was big enough. They seemed to be about 5 feet in diameter, maybe a little more, but they weren't that big, and I said, well, how's it going to get me on there? I hope it doesn't take me, and it didn't. End quote. As she spoke on the phone with her family and followed the lights, Eileen suddenly had to swerve to miss a deer standing in the road. Moments later, a station wagon rapidly backed up to the end of a driveway with tires squealing when it abruptly stopped, then sped straight back into the driveway. Quote, it was so weird. First the deer, then the station wagon backed up, and then they went right back in. It was really odd, like the landscape had gone insane. It felt like the whole atmosphere was almost electrified. Everything was just agitated. As I got closer to the city of Ithaca, I could still see them, but they were getting very high up and the lights of the city were starting to encroach my view. So when I finally got somewhere to stop and told my family where I was, I was looking up and I wasn't seeing anything anymore, and I was, a little disappointed. My family showed up, and we all stared at the sky for a while, hoping to see something, and there was nothing except, planes with their red, blue, and white lights. But when they were following me, they saw a few of the orbs. They didn't see all 8 of them, they saw like 3 of them. And my son said that he saw a big, like a large, some kind of ship or a huge thing that was blocking the stars, and the orbs were kind of going into it. I did not see that, but he said that he did see it, and I guess his cousin saw it as well. End quote. After receiving the call from Eileen and leaving Watkins Glen, Eileen's family first saw the orbs in the sky on Route 79 shortly after passing the Route 227 intersection. Eileen's sister, quote, "Once we reached the top of the ridge, my son who was driving and our nephew who was in the front seat of the van started yelling that they were seeing something, and my sister's son joined them in the front and also started spotting these lights. I am older and don't see as well at night as they do, but I did move to the front of the van to see. I could make out 3 lights moving much faster and more erratically than any plane or helicopter could, traveling first in the sky over Ithaca ahead of us, due east, and then whipping around to swing in the sky to our left, which would be northeast. Their movements were unpredictable, very swift, and jerky. The lights I saw seemed to have a reddish-amber cast, alternating with a yellow-white color. They were very far away and very high in the sky." End quote. Eileen's niece, quote, "As we crested the first hill, I saw 2 lights over the trees at a high altitude to my right, south, pulsing, and alerted my cousins and my mother. We watched these lights for a few moments, debating on whether or not they were stars at first. Both lights were blinking and pulsing very rapidly, and then they moved across the highway to our north and joined with a 3rd blinking light. During this transition, there were a few aircraft flying toward Ithaca, and we were able to compare these lights to the light of a commercial aircraft, and the 2 were definitely not the same. We observed these lights for nearly 10 minutes, and our movement during this time resulted in the lights slowly shifting to the north of us so that I could no longer see them from my position in the driver's seat without completely ignoring the road. At this point, my cousins, my mother was in the back seat talking with my aunt on the phone and no longer actively observing, began to get very excited, saying there was a 4th object that joined the other 3, which had maneuvered into a triangle formation at that point. My aunt's son said that if he observed the 3 lights that were in the triangle formation through the tinted rear windows of our van, that he could make out a huge, dark triangle shape with the lights at its corners. He also reported that the 4th object flashed and disappeared. As we entered Ithaca, we lost sight of the objects and met up with my aunt and observed local air traffic for nearly 20 minutes so that we could confirm none of us could see the objects we had previously seen any longer." End quote. The next day, Eileen saw her nephew, who lived in Odessa, New York, and told him about her experience. Her nephew said that sightings of the lights were common in the area, including reports of the objects diving into Seneca Lake, and that police and media were uninterested in the phenomenon. Quote, he said, "Oh yeah, we see them all the time. People see them disappear into the lake all the time." I asked him, "Well, does anyone have any curiosity about this?" And he said, "We tried reporting it. Nobody wants to know." Then I wanted to report what I had seen. First, I called the police, and they wanted nothing to do with it. They said, "We don't handle that stuff. Try the paper." I tried the local paper. The paper wanted nothing to do with it and said they weren't interested in that kind of thing. End quote. Eileen and her family's experience included a number of details that would be categorized as high strangeness, a term coined by famed UFO researcher J. Allen Hynek in the late 60s to describe UFO sightings that include other anomalous events in conjunction with the appearance of the UFO. A low strangeness sighting would be someone witnessing unusual lights in the sky at a distance. Eileen's close proximity and detailed description of the orb, the number of orbs and their movement, the behavior of the deer in the station wagon, and the observation through a tinted glass window of a large triangular flying object interacting with the orbs all fall under the high strangeness umbrella, as does the following detail shared by Eileen. Quote, I know this is going to sound weird, but I sort of felt connected to it. It was like it had an intelligence, a consciousness of some kind. I felt some sort of connection, but at the same time, I was really scared. I thought, don't take me. I don't think I want to go anywhere with you. But I was intrigued because it didn't just feel like something else was piloting it. It felt like the orb had intelligence and consciousness, which was weird. It wasn't talking to me or anything, but I felt like somehow it was connecting with me. I felt close to it. It was hanging in the air, like it was saying, yes, I'm going to let you see me. Here I am. And I'm just going to hang here. And now I'm going to go. But you can come along. I'm not just going to zip away. I'm going to flow. And it just started to move slowly away, almost like it was drawing me with it. End quote. I asked Eileen why she didn't take any photos during the event. Quote, I was just in a complete state of awe. I was so excited and in disbelief about what I was seeing. And then when it started to pulse and move and I jumped in my car and followed it, there really wasn't any real time to take a photo. It was always moving. They rose up very quickly and I was so busy chasing them and trying to keep up with them. I was so shocked and just in awe of what I was seeing, I didn't even think of it. And later I thought, oh God, why didn't I? End quote. The Burnt Hill encounter in 2011 was actually Eileen's second UFO sighting. The first was on Long Island in the early 1980s, which prompted a deeper interest in the subject for her. Quote, it wasn't very long after I saw it in the 80s that it really spurred me on to read up on UFOs, Bud Hopkins and Whitley Strieber, and watched all these UFO programs and Project Blue Book and Hynek and all that because I wanted to understand what it was that I might have seen. And I found that there were a lot of people in the Hudson Valley that saw these giant things, so I felt somewhat vindicated but very curious about what they could possibly be. Something that's that big and makes no noise at all. So bizarre. End quote. Eileen said the experience in 2011 had a profound effect on her life. Quote, I'm a journalist, a writer. I got into my research thing and discovered all of these sightings all over the world. A lot of orbs, a lot of different shaped things, big, small, you name it, and just this lack of interest from governments and police and newspapers. In my research, I actually saw videos that were done of the orbs near Seneca Lake, in the same basic area where I had seen them. So they are quite common there, and I guess they're fairly common in upstate New York. Yeah, I've got to say it's still pretty fresh. I think about it every day. I'm immersed in it since it happened to me. If somebody could just say, this is what this is where it's from, this is what it's made of, this is why it's here, but no one can tell you. I have theories, but everybody's got a theory. That's the thing. I have no idea what they are. I mean, every day I think about it and I try to make sense of it, and it just kind of woke me up in a sense to like, whoa, there's some stuff out there that we cannot explain, and I think that's amazing. I'm sort of conditioned now that anytime I look up and see something I can't identify, I'm like, is that one? I'd like to see another one. I would, but you can look at the sky forever. It doesn't work that way. I gave up on seeing another one after seeing the first one in the 80s. I said, that's it for me, and then this showed up. And I'm hoping to see another. End quote. So that's Eileen's story. I'm hoping you guys can see why I find this sighting to be maybe the most incredible UFO or UAP story from the Seneca Lake area that I've ever come across. Eileen's description is so dense with details throughout the entire recounting. I found her to be open and authentic and very believable. I found many of the details, as strange as they were, provided another layer of credibility. Her initial reaction to seeing the lighted area ahead of her on the road when she thought it was some type of outdoor stadium lighting would be something many of us would think in that moment while trying to make sense of it. The way she thought that the glowing ball might be a visibility marker on a power line to warn planes and helicopters. Again, a detail that sounds like a very human response. The way she stood and looked at the object while her mind went into overdrive, trying to explain it away as a drone or some type of hobbyist device. And then once her mind ran out of logical explanations for the phenomenon and she realized it was a UFO, she began wondering if and how the craft might have occupants looking to abduct her. I've heard or read Eileen telling the story several times, and aside from very minor details, all the main details remain consistent throughout each telling. And the fact that there were multiple witnesses adds another layer of credibility. Although Eileen had a long-time interest in UFOs, which might lead some people to believe she was exaggerating or misinterpreting a more explainable event, but she had four family members who also witnessed the orbs at the same time. And two of those family members were so impacted by the event that they also submitted reports to the National UFO Reporting Center. But for me, the elements of high strangeness make this story truly astonishing. It's not uncommon for witnesses who see orbs to report that they believe the orbs knew they were being watched, or that the orbs somehow had consciousness. And in recent months, purported government whistleblowers have described secret teams of people within the government called psionics who interact telepathically with unidentified aerial objects, which, when I heard that, it immediately reminded me of Eileen's story. Then the moment with the deer in the road and the truck in the driveway being driven erratically, and the feeling of electricity in the air or that the landscape had gone insane also falls into the high strangeness category, with similar reports of unusual behavior by animals and people during a UFO sighting being fairly common around the world. I also find it very interesting that the spot where the first orb was hovering was almost directly above a spot where several branches of Hector Falls Creek converge, not far from the high peak of Burnt Hill, which is part of the Finger Lakes National Forest and a place where reports of unusual and strange and the paranormal have happened over the years. So could there be a connection between the landscape and the appearance of these aerial objects? Now, personally, I believe Eileen and her family, and I believe that this event happened to them as they described. I just can't think of any reasons all of them would fabricate or exaggerate such a story. And then, coincidentally, in early 2024, shortly after I had completed writing about Eileen's experience near Burnt Hill, I learned about a new sighting on the National UFO Reporting Center website. And this sighting strongly echoed Eileen and her family's observations, except none of the three witnesses in this new sighting were on the ground. So on January 14th, 2024, around 9:10 p.m., an aircraft was in flight over an area approximately 9 miles southwest of Ithaca and headed northwest to Toronto and over Seneca Lake when the pilot spotted something unusual. And here's what the pilot had to say. Quote, "I was the pilot of a flight over the area of Ithaca, New York at 28,000 feet. Another pilot was talking about strange lights on the radio. I began seeing a single white, pale yellow light at 12 o'clock at around 40,000 feet at very long range. The other aircraft, who was behind us at a higher altitude on the same route, reported two lights, one estimated at 80,000 feet. The light tracked north at a high rate of speed before dimming, disappearing briefly, then reappearing, tracking south. This was reported to ATC, who asked further details and began requesting reports from other pilots in the area. Several other aircraft reported the lights. The aircraft behind us reported 5 lights moving in varying patterns, including orbiting each other. He began reporting them as primarily white, but that he had also seen it as red and purple. As we descended into Toronto, one of the lights appeared to be below us. I have seen these lights on other occasions, but never have seen one appear below us. It rapidly climbed from approximately 20,000 feet to 40,000 feet in about 5 seconds. So it would seem that around Seneca Lake, the appearance of numerous orbs in the sky, orbs that seem to move and dance and interact, just might be more common than we think. So the source for this story is a bit unusual compared to others I've covered on this podcast. A couple of years ago, I was searching online for Seneca Lake area cryptid sightings and came across an episode of a podcast in which a Bigfoot encounter near Watkins Glen was spotlighted. The podcast is called Bigfoot Terror in the Woods. It's a fantastic podcast that highlights Bigfoot sightings from all around the world, with many firsthand accounts that were submitted to the podcast by the witnesses themselves. If you're interested in Bigfoot stories, I strongly recommend this podcast. The hosts are William J. Sheehan, a longtime Bigfoot researcher and author of the book Bigfoot Terror in the Woods, Sightings and Encounters, who has appeared on numerous podcasts and radio shows, along with his co-host, KJ Sheehan. You can visit BigfootTerrorinthewoods.com for more information on Bill, his podcast, and his other work. The story comes from episode number 155 of Bigfoot Terror in the Woods, entitled Cool Cars in Watkins Glen and a Bigfoot Encounter. Does it get any better? Which was released on June 16th, 2022. Now, the story was submitted to that podcast by an avid auto racing fan named Henry, who had visited Watkins Glen in 1962 for a race and ended up seeing what he believed was Bigfoot at a fishing area on Catherine Creek south of the village of Watkins Glen. I attempted to locate the witness but was unsuccessful, but the story is so compelling and so strange, and there have been so few Bigfoot reports from the Seneca Lake area over the years, I decided I would share it here. Now, the following is the emailed report from the eyewitness. I've edited out just some of the first portion of the email from the witness, which has like background and his interest in auto racing. So I'm just going to read the section which describes the sighting in great detail. Quote, "There was a time in my life when I wouldn't consider sharing what I saw that day with you or anyone else, but the older I get, the less and less I care about what anyone thinks. Anyway, it was June in 1962 when I went to the Glen, as it was then known, to watch the Glen Classic sports car road races. There is a spot just below a small waterfall in a place called Catherine Creek. Well, whenever I was there, I used to cast a fly. This little waterfall appeared like it was emerging from a stack of slate slabs and dropped into a beautiful little pool with a creek traveling away from it. Now, usually there would be a line of men fishing along the creek, but on the day I was there, it was drizzling slightly and there was nobody around but me. I had been casting the fly, working this pool, when I decided to walk downstream a little bit in pursuit of some better fishing. It was then, as I was standing on one side of the creek, that I swore I saw something moving in the bushes on the other side, but it moved so quickly that I wasn't sure what I had seen. Just a few moments later, the upper half of an enormous black, fur-covered body was standing diagonally to me on the other side, looking directly at me. I couldn't believe my eyes, yet there it was. If I didn't know any better, I would have told you it was a giant gorilla, though. The reality was that it didn't look like a gorilla. It was much too tall and stood very erect. It just stood there kind of swaying back and forth, looking at me, and was in no way trying to hide from my view. I remember that it kept playing with the leaves on a branch next to it as it was swaying. It appeared, as we used to say many years ago, that it had ants in its pants. In other words, it looked nervous. I would also add something that I hadn't really thought much about until many years later, which is the creature which I now know was a Bigfoot had breasts. so I believe what I was seeing at the time was in fact a female. The other thing was this. I've heard others describing a weightlifter type of physique, but what I saw was nothing of the sort at the waist. The Bigfoot was maybe 3 feet wide and maintained that width throughout the entire chest. Of course, the shoulders were marginally wider, which they would be, and although it didn't appear fat, it didn't look particularly virile either, kind of like when you see a bear walking. Now, please don't get me wrong. The thing was maybe close to 8 feet tall and had to have weighed 1,000 pounds. I'm certain that such a beast has incredible strength and abilities. I'm just saying it didn't appear to be of superhero stature, if that makes any sense to you. I was face to face with it for almost 5 minutes when it simply turned and walked away. The face was also the giveaway that it wasn't a gorilla because, yes, it was big and hairy, but that's it. If anything, the face actually looked more human than it did ape." End quote. So I'm not 100% certain of the exact location of the sighting, but going off of the description by the witness, it sounds like it took place at maybe one of the 2 Catherine Creek fishing access sites south of Montour Falls. And while Bigfoot sightings are relatively rare in this part of the country, there have been sightings over the years in the Catskills and Allegheny Mountains in the southern tier and the southern part of New York State. And the location of this sighting is right on the border of those areas. Plus, it's flanked to the west and east by miles of forested land. And other sightings around the country have also described creatures that looked physically very similar to this one, and it's not uncommon for witnesses to describe being watched by the creature from afar. So, what do you think? Did Henry see the legendary Sasquatch on the banks of Catherine Creek just south of Seneca Lake? Let me know what you think, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast because I'll be covering another interesting Bigfoot sighting not too far from Catherine Creek in a future episode. Well, that's it for this time around. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for listening. And if you have any thoughts on any of the topics in this episode, please let me know. And remember to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and get over to SenecaLakeMysteries.com and subscribe to the email list so you don't miss anything. A new podcast comes out every month on the 7s. I'll talk to you then.